My microphone was not on for any of that, was it? Now we've got echo. Okay.
They didn't hear anything?
They didn't hear the first 2 minutes. Okay, let's try that again. I won't do all of it over again, but I'll just say this. Thank you for being here this morning. Now I'm all messed up. I feel like I should start all over. Hey, thank you for being with us this morning. I'll just say this. There is a slight chance that we as a group could be back meeting together, meeting on campus in person as early as December 6th. Now, don't quote me on that. Don't write that in stone. But that is kind of a date that's floating out there. And so we'll just see if that is going to happen. It's all dependent on the county and what they allow us to do. And so we're just going to continue to wait and watch and make decisions based on what the county says. Just one thing before we jump into our text, and that is this. The holiday season is definitely going to look different for all of us this year. I know for some of us, we have to change our plans. Maybe we're planning on going away and that got canceled, or we normally gather with families, but maybe people are a little bit more cautious this year. I would just say this as a pastoral word to you, to continue to be humble and flexible and gracious. People are in one of the most confused, uncertain, weird times that we've ever been in, at least in present memory. And so we as Christians, especially as you gather with some of your unbelieving family and friends, we as Christians need to be gracious to those who may be more cautious. Maybe there's some people who want to wear a mask or don't want to wear a mask or don't want to gather, or they're upset, or maybe the current election has caused and ruffled some feathers. As Christians, we have a great privilege and responsibility to be arbiters of peace, reconciliation, and God's grace to all. And so I just want to encourage you with that. No matter what your holiday plans look like, no matter what ends up happening, that is our role as Christians. Our role is to be reconcilers and to be bringers of peace. Anyway, open your Bibles to the book of James. Between now and the end of the year, and maybe jumping over into 2021, we are going to take a look at the book of James. Now, James is an incredible book in the New Testament. It was written by not the apostle James. Well, there's two James apostles, not the first one or the second one. The book of James was actually written, we believe, by Jesus's half-brother and leader of the Jerusalem church. If you go back into Acts chapter 12, you see that there was a man named James, and just by biblical evidence and whatnot, we see that this James was not one of the disciples, or not one of the original 12 disciples or apostles, but was actually Jesus's half-brother. Now, this is an incredible thing, especially when you consider and read in Mark 3 or John 7 that Jesus's family thought he was nuts, right? Jesus's younger half-brother James at one point thought that his older brother Jesus was crazy. There's written evidence where the family goes and wants to speak to Jesus and basically tell him to shut up and to stop talking. So this kind of transformation of James, a disciple, not one of the 12, but a disciple of Jesus, going from thinking that his brother was crazy to then being a leader in the Jerusalem church, maybe the leader of the Jerusalem church, and also one to write this epistle, is an incredible transformation. And if anything, should continually remind us that no matter where we are in life, God can bring about transformation and reconciliation between us and him. There is nothing that gets in the way of that. And I just want to encourage you with that, no matter where you're at in your life, that God can bring transformation into your life. So James writes this letter. It's called an epistle. And this was probably, now this is interesting, this is probably the first New Testament book written. Out of all of the writings of the New Testament, this was probably the first one. It was written before all of the Pauline epistles. It was written before the Gospels. It reads actually very much like an Old Testament book of wisdom. Those of you who have read James before, you get that sense that this is more of a book of wisdom rather than a letter. James is not necessarily addressing any specific church, as we'll see in a moment. He's not addressing any specific issue in a specific church. He's writing this letter to all the churches scattered around, as we'll see in a moment, and as a book of wisdom. Now, I've titled our series between now and the end of the year, to the end of this book, called "Don't Be Stupid," or "How to Live Your Life in a Way That Makes Sense and Blesses Others." We are in such turmoil and uncertainty. We are living in a day where it seems like what would be common sense or what would be good sense in the way that we live has been not only turned upside down, but been brought inside out. We are living in the opposite of God's intention. We live in a world that is full of hypocrisy and uncertainty. We have leaders making promises during election season and then doing the exact opposite afterwards. We live in a time where laws are set up to protect the powerful and not the powerless. A time when the powerful trample on the powerless, the strong prey upon the weak. The standards and social contracts that we place our faith in are regularly set aside by the groups in power to suit themselves. We are living in a time some call organized chaos, which is a funny way to think about it. But we're living in a time since, and it's not just because of the election, it's not even just because of COVID. It's because of the presence of sin. It's the presence of our fallen world, where you would think good sense and would prevail, where wisdom, where common good amongst mankind would prevail. It actually is the opposite. And so as Christians, we have a responsibility to live in such a way that puts God's sense, that puts God's holy sense, His wisdom, His ways, to live in such a way so that it puts it on display, so that it is a blessing to others. We as Christians can't afford to live stupid lives. And I'm using that word on purpose, not just for effect. That word stupid means the opposite of wisdom, the opposite of good sense. And we have such a calling to live in good sense because however you see eschatology, and if we're coming to the end times or whatnot, regardless, there are so many people, countless, endless people in the world who need to see what the kingdom of God looks like in the life of an individual and a group. And so that is our calling, and that really is the calling that James has to his readers. If you haven't yet, you can grab the famous half sheet and follow along with us. We're going to be looking very briefly today in the first part of chapter 1, and we're going to do something that we actually haven't done virtually before. So we're going to try something new. Hope you're okay with that. We are going to take a look at the first part of the epistle and see what it has to say about good sense, because there are some bananas statements in this first section. Some things that if you read at the outset, if you read just quickly, it feels like it's the opposite of what our world believes, and it actually very much is. But we need to know what God says in his word so that we can live out this good sense amongst the world for them to see. So again, we're going to take a brief look at the first half of the chapter and glean some insight into how we can receive and live out God's wisdom in a world that desperately needs it. I'm going to read this first section, and I want you to do something for me. I want you to underline in this section on your half sheet where you see statements that just sound bananas, that sound crazy at the outset, and how they may be contrary to the common sense of the world. Because again, what we're looking at is how God's sense is, how it flies in the face of the common sense of the world. We want to see how those two things are different and why God's sense makes more sense, oh, that's starting to sound confusing, than the sense of the world. Thank you, Michelle. All right, let's read this together. James chapter 1, beginning in verse 1. James, a servant of God and of the Lord Jesus Christ, to the 12 tribes scattered among the nations, greetings. Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. If any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. But when you ask, you must believe and not doubt, because the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea, blown and tossed by the wind. That person should not expect to receive anything from the Lord. Such a person is double-minded and unstable in all they do. Believers in humble circumstances ought to take pride in their high position, but the rich should take pride in their humiliation, since they will pass away like a wildflower. For the sun rises with scorching heat and withers the plant. Its blossom falls and its beauty is destroyed. In the same way, the rich will fade away even while they go about their business. Blessed is the one who perseveres under trial, because having stood the test, that person will receive the crown of life that the Lord has promised to those who love him. When tempted, no one should say, God is tempting me, for God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he tempt anyone. But each person is tempted when they are dragged away by their own evil desire and enticed. Then, after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is full grown, gives birth to death. Don't be deceived, my dear brothers and sisters. Every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of the heavenly lights, who does not change like shifting shadows. He chose to give us birth through the word of truth, that he might be a kind of first fruits of all he created. In that first section, just as I've read through it and studied it and thought about, okay, what is the wisdom of God in this passage and versus what is the wisdom of the world, I was able to pull out 5 different statements that just don't make any sense in terms of the wisdom of the world. And they're right there on your half sheet for you to look at. Here's where they are. In verse 2, the first one, consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds. That flies in the face of our world, of our security-driven, security-worshiping world. Now, number 2, verse 9, believers in humble circumstances ought to take pride in their high position, but the rich should take pride in their humiliation. This doesn't sound like our uber capitalist way of looking at the world. Number 3, verse 12, blessed is the one who perseveres under trial. This flies in the face maybe of our just kind of our victimhood society, where we're always looking to blame someone else and throw in the towel. Number 4, but each person is tempted when they are dragged away by their own evil desire and enticed. Where we love to blame other people for our state in life, James is saying, look, you're tempted because of your own desires. It is on you. And then finally, verse 17, every good and perfect gift is from above. It doesn't come from the government. It doesn't come from hard work. It doesn't come from family inheritance. All good things come from above. So here's what we're going to do. 5 just statements that just don't line up with common sense of today. We're going to break from YouTube Live in just a moment, and we're going to get into our Zoom discussion groups. From there, I'm going to break us up into smaller groups, and each group is going to be assigned one of these banana statements and answer these following questions. Number 1, because it's a good idea, just take a moment to check in with one another. How was your week? This is not a time to spend. You get 30 seconds. That's it. Some of you groups, no, 30 seconds each person. Okay. 30 seconds each person just to say, how was your week? This is not a time to dump. This is just a time to, hey, how's it going? 30 seconds. Here's how my week was. Number 2, what do you see as a theme of the entire passage? Which actually don't spend a lot of time on number 2. In fact, don't do number 2. We'll come back to that as a whole group. Number 3, or I guess number 2 or whatever, what do you think your bananas statement means in the context of godly sense of the kingdom? So what is it that you think James is trying to say here? What is it that you think he's trying to get across? Number 4, how does your banana statement contrary to the common sense of the day? So James has this wisdom for us, but how does it go against the common sense of the day, of where we live today? And then finally, what do you think your banana statement looks like lived out? So if James says that every good and perfect gift is from above, what does that look like in everyday life? How do we live out that to other people? So we're going to, like I said, we're going to break into those groups. So If you haven't yet, go ahead and end this video, click over to Zoom, and we'll meet you all there. Take care. I would like you to just kind of check in with everybody and then go to 3, 4, and 5.
Hey, Jason, I never get the half sheet, so I have no clue. I only hear what your words say. I could never get it.
She'll have a partner, and so they can help her.
Yeah. I'll make sure that you're partnered up with somebody who
Has a half sheet.
Has a half sheet. Yeah.
That's good.
All right. So let me go ahead and break you up into small groups, and then we will.
Do you want me to do that so you can finish your sentence?
No, I can do it.
Okay.
Jonathan.
Did that make you nervous?
It didn't make me nervous, but.
So you guys are like, nah, we're not waiting. Good for you. Good for you.
Look how big she is. And a big girl, Alyssa.
Yeah. Okay.
How old is she now?
10.5 months.
That's fun. That's really fun.
Francesca, we're at Jamie this weekend. But other than that, it's fine.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm glad that you're okay.
Yeah, doing report cards this weekend, like prepping kindergarten stuff.
So fun.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back. How are you doing?
Hello.
Good.
All right. We'll see how this.
Your shirt a kaleidoscope?
Yeah, watch this. When I turn around.
Amazing.
Kaleidoscope is a long tube with several mirrors that reflect the light, and then when you turn it, sorry. I would have made fun of Caleb, but he's not here, and it doesn't work as well with the person on the screen. Anyway, let's keep going before things implode. So I'd love to hear from each group, and I do not remember which group I assigned what, so I'm just going to go to the first statement. Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face troubles. Who had that one? Raise your hand if you had that one. Mago, and who else? Was that Christy? Okay, so why don't you guys share just your thoughts on what does the statement mean in terms of the kingdom of God, and how is it contrary to the wisdom of the day, common sense of the day?
It's kind of, it's our sanctification process. We're becoming more Christ-like when we're going through trials. And so seeing it from God's perspective, that he's pruning and working on our hearts and making us more like him. So the sanctification process, whereas the world, if you're going through that stuff, you might work really hard, put in the hard work now so that you can have the status or the job title, whatever it is, instead. Does that make sense?
Yes. No, absolutely. Absolutely. Christy, anything to add to that, or that sums it up pretty well?
That sums up what we talked about.
All right, cool. Very good. All
I
right.
think Christy had lots more to add, Jason. I think she's holding back.
You got to get Christy, on the one-on-one, and then it is a vomitus of wisdom that just happens.
Don't ever compliment somebody using that word.
I couldn't get her to be quiet, so I had to speak up and share during this time.
Oh, boy.
So I get it, Jason. I get it.
Right. All right, let's go to statement number 2, verse 9. Believers in humble circumstances ought to take pride in their high position. Who had that one? Raise your hand.
That was us all.
Okay, why don't you guys, what are you raising?
It's a ruler.
A knife.
Oh, okay.
A knife.
He has a ruler. Machete.
Talk about how that defines the wisdom of God and how it's contrary to the wisdom of the world.
Yeah, go for it.
Well, we were all kind of flummoxed. The best we could do was tie that to things that Jesus had said in his ministry.
The Beatitudes.
Which in the Beatitudes, he sets up so many. What's the word?
Yes.
He sets up so many paradigms. He sets up so many things where status is upside down. Where the poor in spirit will inherit the kingdom of heaven, and the meek will inherit the earth, and so on. And And this fits right in that, because the positions of people as you would normally think of them, with the poor being lowly and humiliated, are actually, they should take pride in their high position, where the rich should take pride in their humiliation. And so it's kind, it repeats in my mind those same ideas where just status is upside down. As far as what that looks like, I don't know.
We felt, Jason, we felt you gave us the hardest one.
Oh, he did.
Yes. That was not nice because my brain doesn't work this early in the morning.
Ah,
But
yes.
Caleb came through.
You
Caleb,
know what I'm
yeah.
thinking? I was thinking about that you should take pride in your humble circumstances. When I think of, if God is calling us to be prideful in our humble circumstances, I also know in that he's also calling us out of bitterness. And sometimes when we're in humble circumstances, our natural tendency is to become bitter and angry about where we're at and not to be okay with where the Lord has us. And so maybe that is a good connection to bring in, that
That's good.
I need to be okay with where the Lord has me.
Yeah,
And that is a much easier thing to say than it is to do.
that's right.
That's good.
That also be like your things, not trying to acquire more things or store up your treasures here, but like choosing to be more giving and like spending your money differently than the world spends it.
Right. Right. One thing that you'll see later in this book is James talks again about riches and the wealthy and whatnot. And so there is going to be a connection later on. It's just not right now, but very much so. Just thinking about the words of Jesus and Caleb, like you guys said, just the upside down kingdom, as we looked at in the Sermon on the Mount, where the wisdom of the world is to elevate yourself, elevate your platform, elevate, your position, whatnot. But the wisdom of God is not to elevate self, but to elevate others. And so anyway, there's a lot going on here in this passage, but that is a good word. All right, let's go to the third one. Blessed is the one who perseveres under trial. Who had that one?
Alyssa.
Randy, you and Alyssa, go ahead.
So we talked about how persevering under trial, what does that look like for us as Christians, and then how countercultural that is. So what does it look like to be steadfast? So to be, why does my computer keep shifting? Oh, you keep highlighting me. That's why. Okay, got it. So, so we've talked about how the hope that we have in Jesus is something that we communicate when things are going well, and how it's easy to stop doing that. Even though you still believe in the Lord and you still believe that he's doing something, it's easier to tone that back when you're going under some kind of trial. And so to continue to praise the Lord in that time, and to be communicative of what's really happening, because it's very countercultural to not just say like, oh, I'm fine. So when you're not fine, it's odd to have someone say, actually, I'm not doing well, because a lot of times people are like, what do I do with that? So we talked about that, and we talked about how, I don't know, Alyssa, can you jump in? I'm not sure what else we talked about. Did I sum it up?
Sorry, distracted. I think we talked about like denying that we're in a trial, or just trying to avoid it.
You're good, Alyssa.
You're good.
Sorry, Alyssa.
You made it, Alyssa. All right, I just got the
10-minute notice.
10-minute notice. So let's go to number 4. Each person is tempted when they are dragged away. Eric, you guys had that, and also the smokes. Is that correct?
Yes.
There we go. That keeps switching. I keep switching it back. Every time somebody switches it to speaker view, I keep switching it to gallery because I still like to see everyone while I'm talking. Anyway, that's just
Don't worry, there's a purpose for our plan.
Yeah.
Oh.
You'll see.
It's because you're recording it. I saw you recording this morning, and I'm like, why are you doing this? Because now all of a sudden I'm like, I should talk about something really more important than what I was going to say. But anyway.
No. Trust the process.
Jason, the first thought that I had, at least, and that we shared with the group, was that it didn't seem so bananas of a statement when it came to Christians. Christians have been taught since day one that, it's our sin nature. It's us being, when we're away from other believers, it's when we're away from accountability, that we can be dragged away and tempted. And that's when we are more likely to give into temptation. But the bananas part of it for the world is this aspect of it's our own evil desire. I think many people in the world will say, look, I'm a good person. While I'm influenced by, negative factors and evil factors around me, I am still at core a good person. And sometimes those evil factors influence me and I give in, but on the whole, I'm fine. And I think that's where the Christian sees this passage differently. And we acknowledge that we are in a battle based on our own selfish, our own fleshly, our own sinful desires. And we're constantly trying not to do the wrong thing by giving into it, but it's still a battle that wages war within us. And
Right.
so for us, we acknowledge that sin desire starts with us. It doesn't start outside of us. It starts with us. And then we build in accountability relationships to help us from being dragged away and enticed within the church, small group relationships. But if we don't have those in place, then that's when we're more likely to give into the sin, when no Christian community is holding us accountable to doing the right thing or to pursuing holiness. And especially, we said, during this COVID season, we haven't been together in many of these small group environments. So it's much more easy, I think, for people to be dragged away and enticed by their own evil desires, whether that be as small as, how am I using my time? Am I using my time well right now? Or am I just kind of wasting it and letting it go? Am I giving in to small sins? Not really maybe the large ones, but am I starting to giving into the smaller sins that no one else knows about because I haven't been in that small group community to kind of keep me accountable in those areas? So those are kind of the practical applications, what we saw of that passage as well. So Carrie or Sharon, feel free to jump in and add.
Yeah, it reminds me of Romans chapter 7, where Paul says, the things I want to do, I don't do, and things I don't want to do, I do. It's a constant battle. And I think as Christians, we have to recognize that we're human and not put on always that face that will be put on in church, that everything's okay. There are times when we need to raise our hand and say, I need help with this.
Yeah. And even opening yourself up to a spouse or a friend for that accountability when normal group accountability isn't there.
You had a good word on this too.
I was just reflecting on sorry, I'm stuttering. I was reflecting on the passage, when tempted, no one should say, God has tempted me, for God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he tempt anyone. But each one is tempted when by his own evil desires he is dragged away and enticed. And I was just reflecting on that temptation isn't even a word I see in the secular environment, that it's just, if you want it, you should get it. If you need it, you should do it. And there's not really a filter. It doesn't matter if you do anything sinful, as long as you're polite. Even if you hurt someone, it's okay. And so that God is calling us to resist temptation. And there's other religions that are asking the same thing, but we know that it's only by God's power that we're able to resist temptation, the one and true God.
Yeah, that's good. Well, let me break it down. We've got about 5 minutes left, and so let me go ahead and just kind of bring it back to the end. There is kind of a main point in the passage, and it's this. And if you want to fill it out on your half sheet, you can. But the main point of this first passage is suffering and uncertainty, because that's a lot of what the passage talks about. Suffering and uncertainty are no excuses for spiritual paralysis. In fact, they are a platform for spiritual growth and demonstrating the wisdom of God. you think about this, people all over the world, all throughout history, the greatest, mountains of faith from people have actually rarely been in safe, secure circumstances. They are normally in times where there is great strife and turmoil, uncertainty, hardship, heartache. And so when we are in those situations, those are not an excuse for spiritual paralysis or not growth, although there's times where that may happen. It's not an excuse for it to happen. And it certainly is a platform for us to move ahead and move forward in our sanctification. Here's some takeaways for us, and we'll close on these. Number one, I can thrive in difficult circumstances by leaning into the wisdom of God. I can thrive in difficult circumstances by leaning into the wisdom of God. That's important for us to remember, especially right now. I don't know how you feel about the election, whether you're celebrating or not, whether the future of the country looks good to you or not, your own personal life, whether it looks good or not. No matter what is happening, we can thrive in those difficult circumstances by leaning into God's wisdom and not our own. Secondly, my life is a testimony to others of God's power, love, and grace. These are the first fruits that James is talking about at the end of our passage, that we chose to give birth through the word of truth, verse 18, that we might be a kind of first fruits of all he created. Our life speaks everything that we believe about God. You ever thought about that? Your life, the way you live, how you interact with others in and outside of the church, speaks everything that you believe about God. And so we are a living, breathing testimony of God's grace. The last takeaway for us is that disciples of Jesus, and I don't know, my opinion might be leaking out into this, but that disciples of Jesus operate best in a place of humility, not in a place of power or authority. I think it does too. Not in a place of power or authority or influence, but one of humility. Jesus being the prime example of that. In Philippians 2, letting go of his position in heaven, still being God, making himself out to be a servant. So those are our takeaways from this first part of the passage. We have less than a minute, so I'll just say this. In terms of a practice of the week, I'd love for you to be in the Word. I'd love for you to read the book of James, note the similarities between it and the Old Testament book of Proverbs. There's actually a lot of similarities. Sometimes James is called the Proverbs of the New Testament. And then I would like you to reflect on where certain passages speak to you, and we'll come back to that next week. I think we have about 30 seconds or less, so I just want you to know I love you all. Michelle and I would love to pray for you this week, and hopefully we'll see you in about an hour at the service.
Well, good job. Everybody has a minute to talk.
What do you mean everybody has a minute to talk?
It says they have a minute.
Oh, to like interact right now? Yeah. Well, they can unmute themselves if they want to. I'm not in control. Megan unmuted.
Who's coming? Who am I going to see?
Yeah, who are we going to see in an hour?
And what version were you reading from this morning?
I'm reading from the NIV.
I thought so because it made more sense. Sorry.
I have recently switched from teaching from the ESV to now the NIV. And if you want to know why, I can tell you later.
Good to know, because then I'll follow you in the NIV on my phone.
All right. Love you guys. Have a wonderful morning. See you soon.
See you.
Can you tell them recording this and sending it out to the whole class?
No, but they'll find out.
Why you recorded us?